And we are live. Good afternoon from a really beautiful Nairobi. I'm standing outside a large window looking at the most beautiful jacarandas. It's jacaranda season here in Nairobi. My name is Wanjiro Koinange. I am one of the founders of Book Bank Trust, and welcome to NBO Litfest. I want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. Billy, thumbs up if you can hear me. Fantastic. This festival is anchored in public libraries. If you're new to the work that Book Bank Trust is doing in Nairobi's public libraries, please check out our website, www.bookbank.org, and see some of the incredible visions that we have for public libraries. And one of the panelists on this call has the exact same magical vision for public libraries. So I'm very, very honored to be hosting this session and introducing these speakers to you. But before we do, another thing we're doing with this festival is celebrating Macmillan Memorial Library's 90th birthday. We turn 90 this year, so happy birthday, Macmillan. We hope that you're around for another 90 years. And if for as long as Book Bank is around, we hope that will be the case, or we know that will be the case. Before we start, and before I hand over to our wonderful guest, some house rules. One, if you're joining the call, please keep your microphone muted so we can make sure that everybody's able to hear this incredible wisdom we have coming our way. This is a live session, so we will have room for Q&A around 45 minutes into the conversation. So please use the Q&A function on your screens for your questions, and Muthoni and Billy will be responding to those as they come and as they converse. If you're watching us on Facebook, you can use the comment section there to ask your questions. If you're watching us elsewhere, please tweet us. The hashtag for the festival is NBO Litfest, and we are at the Book Bank everywhere. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it, we're present. We'd also really love your feedback. So there should be polls popping up on your screen as we go. There's probably one that's just popped up on the screen now asking you how you got here, how you found out about NBO Litfest. So please give us your feedback. We love to hear from you. We want to know what we're doing well and what we can do better. So please let us know. There'll also be one coming to you on your emails at the end of the festival, so please look out for that as well. Now, before I hand over, I'd like to thank our partners, the people who have paid to make this vision possible and have believed in this vision and allowed for NBO Litfest to happen. They are Sigrid Rousing Trust in London, that has been a supporter of the culture for a really long time, the Embassy of the Netherlands here in Nairobi, and Sharjah, World Book Capital, that have been a great supporter, not only of this festival, but of all of our work at Book Bank. We've also had people who come on board to piece the different pieces of the puzzle together, and with the programming that is. And I'd like to say a big thank you to British Council, Glasgow Women's Library, Sahifa Journal, Baraza Media Lab, and Paukwa Stories. Now, let's get to the good stuff. Now that all of the housekeeping is out of the way, our speakers for this afternoon, I want to start with Muthoni. Muthoni Garland is someone I have personally admired for a really long time. She has published over 50 books for children, 2 novellas for adults, and several other works published in different literary journals across the world. She's also a storyteller and has appeared on stage in many schools in Kenya and beyond. Muthoni regularly runs workshops incorporating storytelling that help writers to develop stories for children and for teenagers. She's the chief judge of the Moreland Writing Scholarships, which I've applied to several times. And I will keep trying. I will keep trying. And have also judged the Kane Prize for African Writers. Yeah, I'll keep trying, because that is how you build great, by rejection. Rejection builds great. Writing as Muthoni Mushemi, her books for children include Kamau's Finish, The Amazing Race, which is taught as world literature in schools in the USA and the UK. She also wrote The Matatu from Watamu Drove into the Sea, that was developed into a musical stage show promoting environmental conservation, and the science fiction book, Attack the Shidas, which was commissioned by Kenyan Human Rights Commission to stimulate discussion about tribalism in schools across Kenya. Muthoni is also a social entrepreneur, and in 2007, she co-founded Story Moja, which publishes storybooks, textbooks, workbooks, and teacher and career resources for ages between 4 and 16. Story Moja is also the people behind Starter Library, which has done incredible work, and since March 2012, Starter Library has installed 219, I want to say that again for the people in the back, 219 libraries in public and low-cost primary schools all over the country. We know that Kenya has over 20,000 schools, and because most of them don't have libraries, which is why the work that Muthoni and her team are doing is so inspiring and so important. So thank you. So for more information and how to support both Story Moja and Starter Library, please check out starterlibrary.org. And just to mention that Story Moja also organizes the Story Moja Festival in Nairobi, which we hope will be back soon. On to Billy Kahora. And welcome Muthoni. Billy Kahora is an old friend and someone I respect I respect a lot. He has written a non-fiction novella titled The True Story of David Munyake, which was published in 2010, as well as a short story collection called The Cape Cod Bicycle War, which was published in 2019, which is brilliant. It's such a wonderful kind of depiction of different parts of the city. I really do enjoy. I did enjoy reading it. Two stories in the collection have been previously shortlisted for the Kane Prize for African Writing. Urban Zoning is one of those stories, and The Gorilla's Apprentice is the other. He wrote the screenplay for Soul Boy and co-wrote Nairobi Half-Life, which has won Kalasha Awards here in Kenya. His short fiction and creative nonfiction has appeared in Chimurenga, Max Sweeney's, Granta Online, Vanity Fair, and other places. He's also working on a novel at the moment titled The Applications, which I just cannot wait for. And currently, he's joining us from the UK, where he's a lecturer of creative writing at the University of Bristol. He was still recently an editor at Kwani Trust. You guys are going to have an incredible time listening to this brilliant mind speak. So without much further ado, I'm going to get off your screens and hand over. Karibuni, Muthoni and Billy.
Asante sana.
Thanks so much.
What an introduction.
Tell me about this Sasa library. I didn't know about it. Is it Sasa?
Starter library. Starter library.
Starter library. Let's start.
Yes. So we don't start. We don't build buildings. What we do is we go to schools and we persuade them to sign up to the program by agreeing that we can fundraise for libraries for them, for books, and to train their librarians, because the Kenya government does not have a library policy. So what happens is schools have no librarians. So if you just deliver books, guaranteed within a year or two, they'll disappear, because that's how we initially started. But now what we do is we train the librarians and we select the books, deliver the books, set up a space, a lockable space. Sometimes it's a cupboard, sometimes it's a physical room. And we train the librarians to run library programs during the library period, which is mandated by the government, 30 minutes each language each week, but very few schools have the books to actually utilize it. So we run a reading program with trackers, we do monitoring and evaluation, and lots of follow-up visits, etc., to ensure that the library is actually being used. Because it's another story. We'll go off into all sorts of directions if I go there. So maybe I can steer the conversation back to, especially the three libraries that that I want to celebrate. You know, Washukan and team and the book bank team really for putting together, you know, bringing back to life Macmillan and Kaloleni and Makadara. So maybe you can start with something about your library experience.
Yeah, so basically, like when my mom couldn't take care of me, I remember she used to use Macmillan to babysit me. So like I went to Nairobi Primary School, which is almost right in the city center. And I remember when I was, I think in standard 7 and standard 8, when I started going for Saturday classes, those nefarious kind of Saturday classes that I would go and wait for her at Macmillan. But it's sad that Macmillan kind of closed till Book Bank, of course, came back and revived it, which is amazing. But for me, Macmillan was a kind of refuge. It's a place I used to walk from Nairobi Primary, even when we would leave Shule at 3:20 to kind of go wait for my folks for them to come out of work at 5. I grew up partly in Buru. I didn't even know that Makadara actually had a library. So it's just so amazing that these guys have revived that too, which I absolutely can't wait and see. And of course, Kaloleni and its fame, the social hall, this big social hall. But Macmillan, very, very close to my heart. I remember how I used to go there and also just kind of discover these books, old kind of hardcover, and I loved them so much that I would hide them. I would kind of take them away and hide them in different sections, so they were only for me. But yeah, I do remember Macmillan very well. And of course, Kenya National Library, yeah, which I guess you mentioned that you had a lot of experiences with. Have we lost Muthoni?
I think we have. We're just gonna try and get her back.
Okay. I was actually trying to remember this. There's a book that I was very fond of at Macmillan, which I can't quite remember what title. And I've been trying to really, since we started talking, I've really been trying to rack my brains and remember what that book was. Yeah.
There's some other books in there, so we have to build one. Yeah. Let us know when you remember. We're just trying to look.
Apologies for that. I'm not sure what happened to my connection.
Okay. Did you hear what I said last?
Yeah, you were saying something about the habit, you know, the babysitting habit that your parents had.
Yeah, and I was talking about how Macmillan was a kind of refuge, and
yeah,
I was trying to remember this book that I've looked for a very long time, and I can never remember the title, which I first read over there. Of course, it was English. Yeah, but yeah.
Well, libraries were like that for me too, because my parents basically were the type you know, if you're not working, then you can't be, you know, you can't just hang around. You've got to be working at all times. So on Saturdays, we were responsible for cleaning the house and cooking and all that, washing clothes, all that.
That was good. Look how you turned out.
I'm not complaining anymore. I complained for enough years. Now I thank God I know how to do all those things. And so, but what would happen is if we finished, it's actually for us a reward because it meant we didn't have chores. You know, you could get away from chores. So 11 o'clock every Saturday, we would be piled into the car and dropped off at community. So we would be at the KNLS library in community all day. And my father would pick us up at the end of his end of his work day at 6 o'clock. And, you know, and then either pass by the bar and we sit in the back reading the books we borrowed, back of the car, or, you know, or we'd make it home. And I discovered, so because I came to Nairobi I was 11 when we first moved to Nairobi. Yeah. And by then I was already really crazy about both romance novels. So I used to read a lot of romance novels, and funnily enough, very easily available at KNLS libraries those days. Yeah. And also really got into sort of those Ludlum, Sidney Sheldon.
Oh, wow, had those.
James Hadley Chase. They had all these books. Oh,
I'm sure by the time I was old enough to go there, they had been stolen.
They were either stolen or they could even be there, but many people don't use the library even then for reading storybooks. So they would use the library really as a place of, you know, a place to do homework or, you know, really study. But I didn't go for that purpose. I really went. It's the place where I discovered Perry Mason, and I went through this Perry Mason phase. That was insane. I had to read everything that he ever wrote. Wow. So yeah, all those courtroom dramas or whatever. So I have fantastic memories of libraries and feel, you know, it has really shaped my love for literature and been a refuge and more stimulating and interesting. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. So, so if I just ask you sort of a follow-up question. So you met writers in libraries. So are there any writers that you met that, you know, have helped shape your writing, especially in terms of writing Nairobi?
Fascinatingly, like there was this amazing teacher in my primary school who started this practice of a class library in every class. So everyone would bring their books and everyone would kind of share. And that's when I kind of started encountering like Nairobi writing. And this was, I can't remember what that series was called, the storytelling series when I was very young, standard 3, I think standard 5. And then later on that would kind of lead me to, by the time I was finishing primary, actually like reading Bush Trackers, Meja Mwangi.
Yes.
And Meja Mwangi, of course, as I grew older, and everyone talks a lot about him, but I just never ever forget the adventures of Ben in going down River Road. And yeah, I remember that line. What is it? Honey toad something, son of a cement crash, or something like that. But the book I kind of recently discovered, which I liked, was Cockroach Dance, Meja Mwangi.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so Meja Mwangi obviously was a staple, I think, and he kind of taught me grit, Nairobi grit.
Yes.
Some kind of, Potent Ash, his collection with his brother Leonard Kibera.
Yes.
Potent Ash, Sam Kahiga and Leonard Kibera. There's a book that's not very well known that I always go back to, Voices in the Dark. It's also Leonard Kibera. And I think it's the first Kenyan modernist novel. The first Kenyan novel of interior angst. And the main character's interior angst is reflective of the Nairobi of the time and their kind of class, kind of suffering. But in terms, because I also like non-fic a lot, for me, this is a must. Comforts of Home, Louise White, and Prostitution in Colonial Nairobi. I mean, that's when I first understood, that's the only book that has told me where the name Buruburu came from. I was always very curious. What's this Buruburu? Buruburu comes from Bulbul, which is a word.
Yes.
It's an incredible book, Muthoni.
Yes.
Yeah, but outside of Nairobi, I'm big on Suketu Mumbai, that big Mumbai book. So, oh God, I'm blanking a bit now. Suketu Meta, yes. I'm big on him. But also Binya had a very interesting way of looking at Nairobi. Binya was very interested in kind of liminality. He taught me kind of how to see the city in different ways. Like, you'd come and tell me stories about, like, he met this guy in Kibera who was keeping a house in his one room house. Or you tell about Bukusu rituals, circumcision rituals in Pangani. So liminality, the way the city is the city, but also how the city is how reflects people who are kind of forced to be in the city, but have to continue living their lives away from the city there. They have to find ways. So because you can't go back home to Western, you start practicing circumcision rites, or like you miss your cows so much if you move to Kibera that you're like, man, I have to find a cow somewhere and bring it.
Yes, Binya had a way of juxtaposing ideas and concepts that really we're not used to thinking in that way.
And then I'll just mention lastly, sorry, before I forget,
go on.
I was having this amazing discussion with Joyce Nairo, and she was telling me, like, think about how much Nairobi, you remember when they did the bypasses and the link roads? And then they did that big thing. Because I also went to University of Nairobi for some time. University of Nairobi felt like such an oasis. But I think once they started building these kind of overlinks, there's something that happened to the city and the skyline that's quite fascinating. And I've always been trying to figure it in my head what it really means when you change the kind of geography and the topographies of the city. But those are the kind of things and writers that I'm interested in. Yeah. Yeah.
I hear you. What I find, when I've tried to write the city, tried to write Nairobi, I face this challenge of sometimes Nairobi is defined by what it is not. Yes. And sometimes it is, I'll come back to that, but sometimes it's defined by the writers who've helped me define it by what it is. I would say the first writer who had huge impact on me was reading Son of a Woman by Charles Mangua back in the day. And we used to live in Woodley.
When I met him. Have you ever met him?
No, I've never met him. I would die to meet him.
I'll tell you.
Is he still alive? I don't think so.
I haven't seen him for a very long time. I met him back in the 2000s.
Yeah, I've been set up to meet him and somehow it didn't work out. But in any case, I discovered him completely by accident because my father was in the car reading him, and I didn't realize why my father was staying in the car for so long. So he'd arrive home and we're staying in a maisonette, and I was upstairs, in the bedroom, hiding, of course, from him. And then I'd look down and I'd see he's still sitting in the car, and he arrived from work maybe 5 or 6 or whatever time it was. And then 2 hours later, he's still in the car with the light on and he's still reading. I was like, hey, why isn't he bringing that book in the house? So the next morning I jifanyad going to wash his car, and I sneaked into the car and I read Mangua, and life has never been the same, because he was the first African writer I ever read. Because obviously going to school back in the 60s, etc., it was a whole other education.
Yeah.
But the thing that really struck me about him is his very sort of almost a by the way of portraying the intimacies of Nairobi, which is a very crowded city. So even though he talks about the crowd, he always picked very intimate moments. And I'm going to read one that from Son of a Woman that I particularly like. It's cold and damp. So he's describing a scene set at the Nairobi railway station. It's cold and damp as we go under the subway to platform number 2. The whole goddamn place is littered with human beings, males and females, of course. Some fat, some thin, some dirty, some clean, some smoking, some taking a whiff of snuff, yelling babies, suckling babies, People with lots of luggage and people with nothing. On them, apart from tattered items of apparel clinging on. There is a kid with a hole in his pants, and he looks at the hole in my pants as we walk past, and he smiles. I smile at him. We both understand. And somehow he's gone from this sort of list of places, but you keep waiting for that moment when he then draws you in and he points to something so intimate. And I've tried to do that in my own writing because it's hard to convey a place without sounding like you're just doing a description of a setting. And that could be boring. And it could leave the reader wanting to move on or even fly past it. But Mangua sort of showed me a route in was to sort of do it within a context of revelation, you know, just that little intimate revelation. Yeah. So I'd say that's one writer who's really sort of influenced the way that I think about writing the city.
Yeah.
Then another writer who's had, interesting because it's a very recent writer, or at least I only discovered her recently. Her name is Makena Maganjo.
Yes.
And she wrote South B's Finest.
Yeah.
And it's the first portrayal that I've had that actually goes into very intimate depths of a neighborhood within Nairobi. So, and the only other person I've ever seen do that to any extent is yourself, you know? So when you're describing, for instance, one of my favorites of your stories is Red Door, and you're talking about, say, Buruburu, and you almost define it by what it is not, because most of the story is not actually set in Buruburu. So Buruburu is almost the contrast, the place where things sort of influence what you later become, but it is not it. That is not what you become. And it's the thing that allows intertribal mixing. It's the thing that allows perhaps people from slightly, you know, different sort of backgrounds to get together. But when, by contrast, when you go out into Narok or into, you know, other places, then, you know, that changes and you really become aliens to each other and you have to look at each other with very fresh eyes.
Yeah.
So anyway, so Makena, what she does, I think, particularly well, is describe neighborhoods in ways that make them, that bring them to life until you can feel, see, and taste these characters. So she has this like neighborhood, the guy who owns the kiosk, for instance, who becomes so trusted that people even give him his keys. I try and think of Nairobi today giving, and this is going back obviously, in the 80s, maybe even the early 90s, but now you wouldn't give the kiosk guy the keys to your house. And yet I remember as a child growing up, this was common. We used to do it, you know, the kiosk owner would leave the keys so that when I come home, I'd be the first one home, I'd collect the keys from the kiosk. And if we weren't related or anything like that, it wasn't that. It was just that it really was a functioning neighborhood where I grew up in Woodley. Yeah. And that has, and that portrayal, I find it really powerful.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that Makena Maganjo does really well, and I'll just read this passage to illustrate it, is she'll take, she'll describe Nairobi through the character, or this suburb in Nairobi, through the characteristics of its people. So she's describing Kamau, who is Mr. Madai's cousin. Yeah. He's standing on the banks of Nairobi River, reading the newspaper, reading the obituaries, a habit he'd formed years ago when he learned how profitable they were. When the newspapers announced death has occurred of, Kamau would actually read, opportunity has opened for. Anyone could be a deal broker, but it took a certain sensibility to know where the largest, sweetest deals lay, in the dead. Kamau would skim through the list of the deceased, and because the obituary section also functioned as a source of directory with details about previous workplaces, institutional memberships of note, and so forth, he would glean important pieces of information. He learned how to sniff it all out. And it goes on to explain how he takes advantage of this information to make money, to create opportunities for himself. Yeah. And that really sang to me because there's a special place that obituaries have had in my life.
Yeah.
It's many conversations, both urban and rural, have been about I've been triggered by obituaries. So whether I'm talking to my, my grandmother in the days, that was a place of connection. Did you see this in the newspaper? Or we read that, the obituary. And oftentimes that's the only thing that they will know the newspaper for.
Yeah.
But in Nairobi in particular, there's a way of seeing obituaries as a place. It's a hustler's paradise. It's like a place of finding out things that you really should not know, a place of, even today, recently, I lost a member of my family and extended my niece. And it was interesting because at first it took some days to get a pay bill number so that we could fundraise for the, she had cancer. And what I found interesting was that when we put the number of a person so that we could start, that person immediately started getting calls from people who pretended an intimacy based on the information in not quite the obituary, but in the notice where we're giving information. Yeah. And in a sense, obituaries give out even more information than that. So they're relatively easy to exploit. And at a time when the family of the bereaved are at their most vulnerable. So that odd mixture really interested me. And I've written about it in a story I wrote many years ago called The Obituary Man, which was about a man who found a notice in the obituaries that he hadn't put there, although he was responsible for putting in the obituaries, about somebody cutting off their parts of their body in the Nairobi Museum. Yeah. So anyway, that's, sorry, go on, Billy.
Love that story. So Mangwa, for all his, what do you think he is like?
I think he drinks a lot. I think he's not necessarily a social butterfly, but those people who sit in the background watching and getting quietly drunk.
When we met the guy, and it was actually Binya who dragged me to meet this guy. He was a banker at the African Development Bank.
At what?
He was a banker at the African Development Bank.
I mean, that's the last kind of job I'd have imagined for him.
Kind of polite, straightforward dude you will ever meet. Very nice guy.
But I suppose it's also life has changed him, because Son of a Woman, I understand, was fairly autobiographical in terms of, the kind of jobs he'd had. He'd worked at the Ministry of Lands and Settlement. He'd been a settlement officer based in Nakuru. He borrowed a lot from his life. And so maybe it was easier for me to imagine that even the extremes, the drinking and the women and all that, was a reflection of his personal life, which of course is a mistake many of us make. Yes. Yeah. In the 70s, he was part of that post-independence generation, the first ones to join the civil service. Yeah. And it was interesting because he's the first one I read really talking about colonialism, but not from sort of the more political point of view, but from a personal. Like, I'm applying for a job and this bugger won't give it to me because, he's got such low expectations of my ability, even though I'm a graduate from Makerere. So,
I like his voices the voice of his books are actually quite incredible. It's kind of, it's kind of unique, which reminds me of people like Mwangi Gisheru, Mwangi Ruhelu.
Yes.
Mwangi Gisheru was a government chemist.
That I knew, actually. Although I suspect it is also Binya who told me. But yeah.
He wrote a fascinating column as a while back in The Nation, and I've been looking for it ever since. But let's talk about now, let's now try and kind of go into our writing. And
yes,
I wanted to ask you about my favorite story of yours, which is, I just love that story so much. And these cops. But what I liked, and from what you said earlier, I can see that where setting is also always character and it's always plot. So you don't go out to kind of describe Nairobi as a kind of external thing. It's always being seen. It's the soul of the corruption of these people, right?
Yes.
Is this something that you're very conscious about? Like, I want you to kind of say a bit more about what Nairobi does to these characters and what,
Well, You know, I wrote eating. I used to work in market research many years ago, like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I would visit people's homes and
Yeah.
watch them cook with Royco, for instance. So it was that kind of research where you're seeing in action, like people will say, I use 1 spoon of cocoa to make my, chocolate in the morning or my drink in the morning. And Cadbury would recruit me and they'd say, wait a minute, if people actually used 1 spoon of cocoa, then we would be selling about 100 times what we sell. So what's really going on? So I would go and actually give people the tin of cocoa and I would say, okay, please let's make some cocoa for me. And they would, make the cocoa and I'd see it's actually 1 spoon to a sufuria, not to a cup. So it's stuff like that. You're always looking for insights. So anyway, one of my favorite places to go into was into sort of police barracks.
Wow.
And sort of see where they live and because police and teachers. So I used to visit a lot of police and teachers, especially because they constitute such a big percentage of our formal workforce in Kenya.
Yeah.
But police barracks were particularly fascinating to me because they were living in impossible situations. They literally were living on top of each other. You have a flat that's 3-bedroom and 4 families live in it. Wow. And the 4 families are from different parts of the country. They are not related. Some are married for a long time. Some are newlyweds. Some are not married at all. So, and then you have night duty. So some cops are out at night. They've left their wife or girlfriend or whoever partner in the house. So it created a very strange feeling when you are in there. And then even the women who are the ones I used to mainly do the research with, they would tell me, please leave by 4 o'clock. Don't stay here beyond 4 because there's so much violence. It's very unstable. And I won't go much into that, but that's where I did the research. Wow. And I would go sometimes and then in Nairobi in particular, it was very popular back in the 80s and sort of, suddenly I noticed it in the 80s and maybe early 90s to go and drink and have a social evening at the police station. Yeah. And you'd go to the police canteen in Kileleshwa, in Spring Valley, etc. And when you go to the police station, the drinks were cheaper. And it was not considered something unsafe to do, although you wouldn't go alone, you'd go with a group. But having said that,
I remember us going to drink in Kileleshwa police station.
Yeah, it was popular. Wow. And then what would happen is the cops would get drunk. And once the cops got drunk, you had to be careful because the balance of power suddenly completely shifted. You are no longer equals, So you have to be very careful what you say, how you say, etc. And as the political tensions in Kenya increased, it became increasingly unsafe to be within a police station. And as especially, I think the socioeconomic challenges grew and the police were so underpaid at one point, and price of living, etc., had gone crazy, it became even more tense. So the switch would happen earlier and earlier in the evening. And I was very fascinated. Like when you'd start out, the police are your friends. You're just talking, they're at the neighboring table or something, and you're,
just buy them one at the beginning.
Yeah, you buy them one, you're having a good time.
Yeah.
But over time, you notice like when they switch, it's almost like a thing they've been trained to do because they do it always in the same way. It doesn't matter which police station you go to. Yeah. And then I notice it on the street. It's like a script they're playing out to you so that whether you're stopped by a cop on Koinange Street or in Lavington or wherever, it's almost like there's this script that switches on. And I was fascinated by that. Yeah. And then obviously the police violence, there's been so many reported cases where police kill other police. So the story was really an exploration of that. And what and oftentimes the causes are around women, shared women, because of the living conditions that they're in that make it very, very difficult. They're not conducive to a healthy family life. So that's where that story came from.
Wow.
Yeah. But it's such a long time ago, and I reread it because you said you'd ask me something about it. And I was like, damn, it just brought back so many memories of those years visiting cops cops' houses. That was interesting. Tell me about the research you did for Red Door. I'm very curious. And what exactly did you mean by Red Door as opposed to Black Door?
So Maasais, the Ma people in Kenya, from what I was told, is that belong to two clans, Mlango Nyeusi and Mlango Nyekundu. That's so Red Door and Black Door is a literal translation. So the characters in that story are from Mlango Nyeusi, Mlango Nyekundu.
And is there a distance? Is there a bigger distance between Red Door Maasai and Black Door Maasai?
No, not particularly, but if you're in one, if you're in, you see that what the Ma from my time there is that because of kind of nomadic relationships, how you identify yourself. If you're not of part of the big clan that is known, if you're not, you don't know each other by name, you kind of go farther. And the farthest you go before you get to Ma, we are both Ma, is Mlango Nyekundu, when Mlango Nyekundu Nyeusi. Yeah. And this is just a way of identifying.
Yes.
Yeah, and trust. And trust and that kind of thing. But some of my best friends growing up were Maasai, and they would take me along to where their dad came from, and then after high school, they decided to become wheat farmers.
Yes.
So they took me and educated me on all things wheat that you see in that story. So I spent a lot of time there.
Is that how you usually research your stories? Because your stories...
That story is particularly close to the autobiographical, not all of them. So that story, maybe the story based in South Africa is kind of loosely based on that, but that story is, I'm very interested in what happens to childhood friendships and friendships of young men as you grow older. So I find that you either break or you kind of stay with them, especially with men. So I'm very interested in male friendships and what happens to them, and it's part of the process of growing up in what happens. That's what I was really interested in that story.
I'm glad you say that, because masculinity was the question I was going to ask you, how your story is defining and exploring masculinity.
Yes.
And the thing that struck me is the underlying violence, even between friends. The tension between sort of love and hatred is so, it palpitates.
Yeah, it's a very weird one, isn't it? And yet till you're writing is when you realize it, but when you're living, you don't think about it so much, and which is also a disturbing thing in a sense. But the one thing about the beauty about growing up, maybe now, say in Kenya, is that those things are so frowned upon. But man, growing up in the estate, man, stuff was like just constantly like fighting.
Yeah.
Like that. When I think about that stuff, I'm like, what was that stuff? And the fascinating thing is, in the neighborhoods, yes, and there was no way of kind of controlling it. And I remember, like, I never actually, like, it was so policed that you could, if you actually fought, you'd be expelled. Yeah, but this,
so it went.
It's in the informal spaces, like,
right.
Yeah, what is happening there?
Is it still happening?
No, it's.
What has changed?
First, kind of helicopter parenting one, and also but also you see that stuff is also brought on by the kind of harsh parenting, that parenting violence also of the threat, even though it's not there, the threat. So what I think happened partly was that increasingly, from my experience, is that stuff was always curbed at home, at least in my own home. That thing was kind of frowned out. So there's something that was happening there. But what happened was that people, like I think like growing up, being born in the 70s and kind of growing up in the 80s and 90s, those are the first parents of the city. So
Yes.
they're learning, right? And then they learn, if you don't watch your kids, man, fuck, they become criminals. So the people who kind of internalize this kind of violence are the ones who become criminals because they're quite successful at it, right? So guys are like, I don't want any of that stuff. In fact, most of the time, my parents, I remember, would just try and lock us in the compound.
Yes.
It starts having a direct correlation. But for a long time, I think in the 70s, when Nairobi was relatively safe and didn't have that much crime, like in secondary school, if you're continuing with that behavior, man, the world teaches you, right? They are the cops.
Yes.
And all that stuff. So,
yes.
So it's just a kind of evolution of society thing. But growing up, like before we moved in Buru, like, yeah, like, and then now people coming from other estates now.
Yes.
Jericho, those places. Yes. Hey, yes. It's real.
I hear you. Now, I get a message that we need to wrap up. So I'll just share one more thought about writing Nairobi.
Yeah.
That occurs a lot, certainly in my writing, but I've seen it in so many people's writing, including yours, which is Nairobi as a middle-class precipice. You've got this, Nairobi, yani, you can slide kidogo and that's a major fall. And we saw it during COVID. You're always in Nairobi, one salary away from eviction, one salary away from your whole standard of living is finished. It's such a tenuous place to keep your toehold on. And I think that often fuels the scale of corruption that we see, because people want to protect themselves, build up some kind of nest eggs, not just for themselves, but for their family members, because they think, well, if I lose this opportunity, there'll never be another one. So it's a place that, even though on the surface it looks like it's got many opportunities, those opportunities are very fleeting and they're not deep. And I like to explore that in writing, because people make a lot of decisions. I was exploring it in Halfway. You make a decision as to where to live based on the kind of aspirational lifestyle that life that you're hoping for. Yeah. And the trouble with Nairobi is that Nairobi doesn't care. It's like, it's just this precipice. You can be at the top 1 minute and the next you're gone.
That, as my last thought, is like how people are smart about. I'm very interested in bodies, in the way they move and the way they look at you and the way someone talks to you.
Yes.
Talks to you in kind of public. And
yes.
The person in Nairobi who's quite successful is the one who's able to do those, read who is who in terms of kind of aspirational game, right? Yeah, because I'm thinking my next story collection, if I ever get around to it, will be around middle age. Because the thing about Cape Cod was about youth, basically. But I'm now interested in 40s, 50s, almost over there. What it means, what Nairobi means. Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm always curious about that thing of how someone says to you, habari or sasa, and what they do. Yeah.
And what's really going on.
Yes.
And if you're not on the inside, you really don't know. And how much those just little cues will give away everything. Your age, your economic group, your, where you hang out, the kind of friends you have, almost like the kind of literature or maybe not literature you read, the fact that you read literature, there is, Nairobi is a very coded city, highly coded city.
Yes.
And just a certain emphasis, a certain way of looking at people, and you can discombobulate them even when you're part of them, because they're like, suddenly they realize you don't fit. It's like, I was trying to talk to teenagers today about tuning, and they're just looking at me, like I'm crazy, and it's not just the vocabulary. Of course, the vocabulary is wrong. Guys don't tune girls anymore, they vibe them, or girls vibe boys, as I was told today. It's not necessarily that how it used to be and what have you. but it's also the politics of it has changed, you know, and if you're not in line with the politics of it, you can be having one conversation and somebody's having a completely other one.
Yeah.
And then also those codes can really help you. Like when I get stopped by cops, now I have learned, you know, just do that. Whoa, hey, my husband's gonna kill me. Hey, I borrowed this car now. Okay.
Cops are the smartest at smelling who you are.
They smell, kabisa. They smell, but you understand if you appeal to a certain type of stereotypical masculinity, which is protect this woman who's going to be twangad tonight because she took her husband's car and is out late, they will understand that in a different way. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, we're at that time apparently. So yes. I just want to say to everybody listening, thank you for tuning in, and you can send your questions on to us at the care of Book Bank. And thank you very much, Book Bank, for inviting us. Thank you very much to the sponsors of this. I am so sorry. I do know who you are, but I can't. I've run out of time, so I will just say thank you to everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us. Take care.
Asante sana.
Muthoni, cheers.
Hey, cheers, Billy.
We truly enjoyed that very nostalgic conversation. Thank you for telling us what inspires your writing. But this has felt like, yeah, I really enjoyed that conversation. Thank you so much. It felt like taking a journey through your writerly lives, and we couldn't be more grateful. Thank you for joining us, Muthoni. I know you're in the car, like having mentored these young humans. So thank you for making time for us. We're gonna wrap there. Join us in 6 minutes for our next session. Thank you to Billy and Muthoni for telling us about writing African cities, and to all of you who joined both on Zoom and on Facebook. This is the NBO Litfest. This is our second last event for the festival. So join us in 5 minutes for our next one. My name is Wanjiro Koinange, and goodbye.
Sure. Cheers. Bye.
Goodbye. Bella.